Alyssa never thought she'd forget the way Steve used to smile at her. It was the kind of smile that felt like sunlight after weeks of rain, warm, sure, and full of promises. But now, sitting alone at the corner of her small apartment, she could barely picture it without her chest tightening. It had been a year since the accident. A full year of sleepless nights, tear-stained pillows, and unanswered questions. They had told her he was gone, that Steve's car had been found wrecked at the bottom of the ravine, no trace of his body, just bloodstains on the seat and shattered glass across the rocks. For months, she had clung to hope. Maybe he had survived. Maybe he had crawled out and lost his memory. Maybe he was out there looking for her. But as weeks turned into months, and months into a hollow, aching year, even her hope began to rot. She had visited his grave, which felt more like a cruel joke than a place of rest, since there was nothing in the casket. Just a photo of Steve in his leather jacket, the one she had bought him for his birthday, and a small, cold plaque with his name carved into it. Her friends had begged her to move on. Rita, her best friend since college, had been the most insistent. "Alyssa," she had said more times than Alyssa could count, "you can't let his ghost haunt you forever. You're too young to bury yourself alive." But no matter how many times Alyssa tried to breathe life back into her empty days, she always ended up circling back to Steve. His laugh, the curve of his jaw, the way he used to brush her hair behind her ear like she was the most delicate thing in the world. It was on a chilly Thursday morning when it happened. Alyssa had forced herself out of the apartment for a change of scenery, thinking a simple cup of coffee at her favorite cafe might numb the ache in her chest. The bell over the door jingled as she stepped inside, her boots clicking softly against the wooden floor. She almost turned around and left when she saw how crowded it was, but something, maybe fate, maybe cruel curiosity, made her stay. She found a small table by the window and sat down, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic mug the barista handed her. Her gaze drifted, unfocused, until it landed on a couple sitting by the far corner. At first, she noticed only the woman, tall, elegant, with dark hair cascading down her back like silk. She was laughing softly, her hand resting on the table between them. Then Alyssa's eyes shifted to the man across from her. Her breath caught, her heart stumbled. It felt like the world had tipped sideways, like reality itself had cracked open beneath her feet. Because the man, he had Steve's face. Not just similar, not a vague resemblance, but him. Steve, alive, breathing, smiling, and holding another woman's hand as if he had never known Alyssa, never promised her forever, never disappeared from her world like a ghost swallowed by the night. She blinked hard, certain her mind was playing a sick trick on her. She rubbed her eyes until they stung, but when she looked again, he was still there, still smiling, still Steve. Her Steve, except he wasn't hers anymore. He was laughing with another woman, leaning in close like he had once done with her, like he used to when he wanted to share a secret meant only for them. A wave of nausea climbed up her throat. Her hands trembled so badly she nearly spilled her coffee. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her chest ached like she had been punched from the inside out. Was it possible? Could he really be alive all this time, living a new life while she mourned him every single day? Her mind screamed 1,000 questions, but her lips stayed sealed, too frozen with shock to speak. And then, as if the universe wasn't finished torturing her, Steve glanced up. His eyes, those familiar hazel eyes that once looked at her like she was his entire world, locked onto hers. There was no flicker of surprise in them, no flash of recognition. Instead, they darkened for a split second, as if he'd seen a ghost. Alyssa's heart crumbled beneath the weight of that look. Because in his eyes, she wasn't the woman he had loved and lost. She was a stranger. And he wasn't dead. He was very much alive, and he had moved on. Alyssa's mind was spinning so fast it felt like the walls of the cafe were closing in on her. The hum of conversation and the clinking of cups faded into a dull roar in her ears. She couldn't tear her eyes away from him. Steve, alive, sitting, just 20 feet away, as if he hadn't left her shattered and sleepless for a whole year. Her fingers dug into the edge of the table, knuckles whitening as she struggled to keep herself from standing up and screaming his name across the room. She wanted to believe there was an explanation. She wanted to believe this wasn't real, that maybe it was a cruel lookalike, a twin she never knew he had, or a hallucination conjured by too many restless nights. But deep down, she knew better. She had kissed those lips too many times, traced the lines of that jaw in the softest hours of morning. She had memorized him. This wasn't a mistake. Alyssa's chest heaved with uneven breaths, and before she could think about what she was doing, her legs were already moving. She stood, her chair scraping sharply against the floor, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. But she didn't care. She couldn't sit there and suffocate. She needed answers. She needed to hear his voice, to understand how he could be, here, alive and looking at her like she was a ghost from a past he wanted to forget. As she stepped closer, her pulse thundered in her ears. The woman sitting across from him noticed her first, her dark eyes narrowing slightly as if sensing trouble. She reached for Steve's hand, protective, possessive, and that simple touch sent a spike of fury through Alyssa's veins. Who was she? How long had she known him? How many nights had she spent where Alyssa should have been? Steve's gaze never wavered as Alyssa approached. If anything, he stiffened, his jaw tightening as though he had been dreading this moment. There was no welcome in his expression, no relief, only discomfort, and beneath it something colder. Guilt, maybe, or worse, indifference. Steve? Alyssa's voice cracked as she spoke his name, tasting it on her tongue like ash. His eyes flicked away for the briefest second before returning to her face. I think you have the wrong person, he said, and the lie slid out of his mouth so smoothly it made her stomach twist. His voice was the same, deep and steady, the voice that used to whisper dreams into her ear at night, but now it felt like a dagger. No, she rasped, shaking her head, tears blurring her vision. No, it's you. Steve, it's me, Alyssa. The woman across from him shifted uncomfortably, her eyes scanning Alyssa with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. Is there a problem here? She asked, her voice low and sharp. Alyssa ignored her. Her entire focus was pinned to the man, in front of her, the man she had buried in her heart and mourned in her soul. I thought you were dead, she whispered, her voice trembling. They told me you were dead. I went to your grave. Steve's lips thinned into a tight line. For a heartbeat, his mask slipped, and she saw something flicker behind his eyes, a shadow of pain, of memory, of something he didn't want to face. But just as quickly, he buried it. You've made a mistake, he said flatly, pulling his hand away from the other woman's grasp and placing it in his lap like he was trying to distance himself from the entire situation. A mistake? Alyssa's voice rose, sharp and edged with disbelief. You're telling me this is a mistake? You're not Steve? After everything? After... Her throat closed, emotion choking off the rest of her words. The woman across from him stood, her chair scraping back against the floor. She stepped between them, a silent wall of warning. I don't know who you are, she said icily, but you're causing a scene. Leave. But Alyssa couldn't move. Her feet felt bolted to the floor. Her eyes, red with tears, stayed locked on Steve's face, begging for an explanation, for something, anything, that could make this make sense. And then Steve did the unthinkable. He stood, placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, and with a final glance at Alyssa, a glance filled with something too heavy to name, he walked away. Just like that. Past the tables, past the barista, past the door. He left her standing, there, trembling, breaking, her whole world collapsing in a way she never thought possible twice in one lifetime. Alyssa's knees nearly buckled beneath her. Rita's voice echoed in her mind, warning her not to let Steve haunt her forever. But it was too late. He had become her ghost long ago, and now, seeing him alive, he had become something worse, her living nightmare. The cold outside hit her like a slap, but it didn't stop her. Alyssa stumbled out of the cafe, her breath sharp and ragged, her eyes scanning the street wildly. Steve was nowhere in sight. He had vanished as quickly as he had reappeared in her life, slipping through her fingers like mist. She pressed her palm against her chest, as if that could hold her heart together, but it kept pounding like it wanted to break free. She couldn't let it end like this. Her mind screamed for answers, her legs carrying her down the sidewalk almost, on their own. She didn't care how desperate she looked. She didn't care about the tears streaking down her cheeks, or the curious looks from strangers as she pushed past them. Her whole reality had just split apart in that cafe, and she needed to know the truth. A part of her feared she had lost him again for good. But then she saw him, at the far end of the street, his familiar stride unmistakable, the woman still beside him, her arm hooked around his like they were nothing more than an ordinary couple on an ordinary morning. Her stomach twisted painfully. "Steve!" she shouted, her voice breaking from the strain. He didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. He just kept walking, like her voice was wind through the trees, something meaningless and forgettable. Desperation clawed at her chest. She picked up her pace, weaving through pedestrians, her heart racing faster than her steps. When she finally caught up, she grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. He turned, slow and reluctant, and the woman beside him bristled, shooting Alyssa a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Let go of him!" the woman snapped, her voice tight with control, but Alyssa barely heard her. "Steve!" Alyssa gasped, breathless. "Why are you pretending? Why are you acting like you don't know me?" For a moment, his mask cracked again. His eyes flicked to the woman at his side, then back to Alyssa, and she saw it there, buried deep behind the cold facade. Fear. Not fear of her, but fear of the truth coming out. "I'm not him," he said again, but his voice faltered. His gaze dropped to the ground like he couldn't bear to hold hers. "Liar," Alyssa whispered, the word burning on her tongue. "You're lying to me. Why? Tell me why." The woman stepped between them once more, firmer this time. "I said let him go," she growled. "You're harassing us. Leave before I call the police." Alyssa's eyes snapped to her, fury boiling in her chest. "Who are you to him? His wife? His savior? His puppet master?" The woman's lips curled into a tight, bitter smile. "I'm the one who knows the truth," she said coldly. "Something you clearly don't." Steve's shoulders tensed, his jaw clenched, and Alyssa could see the storm raging inside him. He looked like a man cornered, a man about to break. "I loved you," Alyssa choked out, tears welling again. "I mourned you. I buried you, Steve. I grieved every single day thinking you were dead, and here you are, alive, pretending you don't. Know me while holding her hand like none of it mattered. How could you do this to me?" Her voice cracked under the weight of the pain, raw and trembling. For a heartbeat, Steve's eyes softened. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak, to give her the truth, to confess the secret suffocating him. But then, just as fast, he shut down, his gaze hardening into stone. "Forget me," he said, and it felt like the final blade twisting in her heart. "It's better that way." Alyssa staggered back like his words had physically struck her. Her chest felt hollow, as if the wind had been knocked out of her. She stared at him, at the man she had loved more than her own breath, and saw nothing but distance in his eyes. "Better for who?" she whispered, her voice broken. "For you? For her? What about me, Steve?" He didn't answer. He turned his back to her like she was nothing, like their memories had turned to dust, and walked away. The woman followed him, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her posture triumphant, like she had won some cruel game. Alyssa stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the man she thought she knew disappear into the crowd once again. Her heart throbbed painfully, and she realized with brutal clarity that she wasn't just mourning his death anymore. She was mourning the death of the man she had loved, because even though he breathed, even though he lived, the Steve she knew was gone. And in his place stood a stranger with his face. The world around Alyssa blurred as she stood there, her body rooted to the spot, but her mind spinning like a cyclone. People brushed past her, some casting her curious glances, but she didn't care. She could still see Steve in her mind, the way he looked at her for that brief moment like there was something trapped behind his eyes, something he couldn't say, something he wasn't allowed to say. Her hands trembled at her sides as she forced herself to breathe. She couldn't let it end like this. Not again. She had already buried him once. She wasn't going to bury the truth along with him. Alyssa turned back toward the cafe, her pulse still thundering in her ears. Rita. She needed Rita. If there was anyone who could help her make sense of this mess, it was her. Pulling her phone from her coat pocket, she fumbled with the screen until she found Rita's number and pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times before Rita's familiar voice came through, sharp with concern. "Alyssa? Are you okay?" "No," Alyssa croaked, barely holding back the sob lodged in her throat. "No, I'm not okay. I just saw him. Steve. He's alive, Rita. He's alive." There was a pause on the other end, then a breathless, disbelieving laugh. "What? Alyssa, what are you saying? Steve is—" "Don't say it," Alyssa cut her off, her voice shaking. "Don't tell me he's dead. I saw him, with my own eyes, at the cafe on 4th. He was with a woman. He looked right at me. He spoke to me, Rita." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you sure it wasn't someone who just looked like him? Alyssa, please. I don't want to see you spiral into something dangerous." Alyssa swallowed the lump in her throat. "I know his face, Rita. Better than my own. It was him." Rita's voice softened, worried now. "Where are you?" "Outside the cafe. They just walked away. I lost them." "Stay there," Rita said firmly. "I'm coming to you right now." The call ended, and Alyssa slid the phone back into her pocket, her breath coming in short, shaky bursts. Minutes felt like hours as she stood there waiting, staring in the direction Steve had gone, hoping for a glimpse of him, anything, even just a shadow, but he was gone. When Rita arrived, she wrapped Alyssa in a tight, grounding hug. "Tell me everything," she demanded. Alyssa did, spilling out every detail between uneven breaths. The way he looked at her, the way he denied knowing her. The woman at his side who acted like Alyssa was some deranged stranger. Rita listened intently, her brows drawn tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. When Alyssa finished, Rita hesitated before speaking. "If it really was him," she said slowly, "then there's something very wrong here. And I don't believe in coincidences, Alyssa. Not like this." "What do we do?" Alyssa asked, her voice raw. Rita's eyes darkened with resolve. "We find out who she is, the woman with him. She knows something." Alyssa nodded, a spark of determination lighting inside her chest. She couldn't let Steve vanish from her life again, not without answers. She wouldn't survive it. They spent the rest of the afternoon digging. Rita, always resourceful, knew people, the kind who worked at the cafe, people who remembered faces. They described the woman easily: tall, elegant, sharp eyes, a regular customer but never with Steve until today, and she always paid in cash, suspicious. "What about him?" Alyssa pressed. "Did anyone know him?" The barista, a young guy with a lip. Ring scratched his head. "First time I've seen him," he admitted. "But she was acting different today. Nervous, I think. Kept looking at the door like she was waiting for someone." Alyssa's pulse quickened. Waiting for someone. Was it Steve she had been waiting for? Or was it Alyssa? As they walked away from the cafe, Alyssa's mind raced. If this woman had been nervous, maybe she had known Alyssa might show up. Maybe this wasn't a coincidence at all. Maybe they had expected her. Maybe Steve had expected her. Rita gripped her arm gently but firmly. "We're not stopping," she said. "I'll help you find him, Alyssa. I swear it." Alyssa looked at her friend, tears blurring her vision. What if the truth is worse than losing him? What if he left on purpose? Rita's jaw tightened. Then you deserve to know why. Alyssa swallowed her fear. Rita was right. She deserved to know why he had left her to drown in grief while he built a new life in secret. She deserved to drag the truth into the light, no matter how much it hurt. And as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street, Alyssa felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, but fire. She was done grieving. Now she was hunting. The next morning felt heavier than all the ones before it. Alyssa barely slept, her mind trapped in a loop of questions without answers. She kept seeing his face in her head, the way he had looked at her, the crack in his voice when he had denied being Steve. There had been truth buried in his lie, she was sure of it. It wasn't clean, it wasn't final. He hadn't moved on as smoothly as he pretended to. Rita showed up at her door just past sunrise, a small folder in her hand and a grim look on her face. "I didn't sleep either," Rita confessed, stepping inside, "but I found something." Alyssa's heart thudded. "Tell me." Rita flipped open the folder and pulled out a few printed photos, her fingers tight around the edges. The woman. Her name is Vanessa Crawford. Alyssa's eyebrows knitted. "Vanessa? I don't know any Vanessa." "Neither did I," Rita said, laying the photos on the table. "But I did some digging. She works at a private medical facility just outside the city. Not public access, high security, the kind of place people pay a fortune to disappear into." Alyssa's breath caught. "Medical facility?" Rita nodded grimly. "And get this, she's not just some nurse or administrator. She's on the board of directors, which means she has power, access, influence." Alyssa stared at the photo. Vanessa's face looked colder in still image than it had in person. Sharp cheekbones, piercing eyes, lips set in a tight line. There was no warmth there, no softness, only calculation. "And Steve?" Alyssa whispered. Rita hesitated, then shook her head. "No records. It's like he doesn't exist." A sick knot twisted in Alyssa's stomach. "Because they wiped him." "Exactly," Rita confirmed. "If he's connected to that facility, they buried him deep." Alyssa dragged a shaky breath into her lungs. "So what is it, Rita? What is that place? Some kind of hospital?" Rita's eyes darkened. "Not exactly." She pulled out another paper from the folder, this one marked with an official-looking letterhead. Alyssa's eyes scanned the document, her pulse quickening as she read the words aloud. "Neurological research, experimental therapy, identity, reconstruction?" Her voice trailed off, disbelief crashing over her. She looked up at Rita, her chest tight. "They erase people?" Rita's jaw tightened. "More than erase them. They rebuild them, give them new identities, new memories, fresh starts. For a price." Alyssa's heart pounded so loudly it felt like her ribs might crack. "But why Steve? Why would he go there? Why would he let them do this to him?" Rita gave her a heavy look. What if he didn't let them? The weight of that thought pressed down, hard. What if Steve hadn't chosen to disappear? What if he had been taken, forced? What if the accident wasn't an accident at all, but a setup to wipe him clean, to make him vanish from his old life? From her? A chill crawled down Alyssa's spine. "We have to go there," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "We have to get inside." Rita didn't hesitate. "I already made some calls. I know someone who owes me a favor. He works security at the facility. If we time it right, we can get in tomorrow." Alyssa felt a surge of determination, sharp and burning. For the first time in a year, she had a direction, a thread to pull. She wasn't going to let them keep Steve from her, not without a fight. As they prepared, packing the essentials and going over their plan, Alyssa couldn't help but wonder what they would find behind those walls. Would Steve remember her if she could get close enough? If she said the right thing, touched the right part of his heart, would it break through whatever false life they had built for him? Or would she find that the man she loved was truly gone, replaced by someone who didn't want to be found? Either way, she had to know she couldn't carry this weight anymore. She had to face the truth no matter how much it hurt, no matter what it cost her. And deep inside, beneath the fear, a single thought burned bright and unshakable. She was not losing him again. The facility didn't look like a place where people disappeared. From the outside, it could have been any high-end medical center, glass walls that reflected the morning sun, a manicured lawn, sleek cars in the parking lot. Nothing about it screamed danger, but Alyssa felt it the moment they stepped out of the car. It was in the air, in the way. The security cameras tracked their movements, in the way the guards, even though they looked relaxed, stood just a little too stiff, their eyes a little too sharp. Rita kept her face neutral as she checked her watch. "He's late," she muttered, scanning the entrance for her contact. Alyssa's heart hammered in her chest. What if they found out? What if they got to him first? Before Rita could answer, a man in a gray uniform approached them, his expression tight with nerves. He didn't introduce himself, didn't shake their hands, just flicked his eyes toward the building and said under his breath, "I've got 10 minutes. After that, you're on your own." Alyssa and Rita followed him through a side entrance, their footsteps muffled against the polished floor. The man led them down a series of pristine corridors, past rooms filled with expensive-looking equipment and glass walls that showed patients sitting motionless, their eyes vacant, staring at nothing. Alyssa's stomach twisted. "What are they doing to them?" she whispered. The man didn't answer. He just kept walking faster. They stopped at a locked door at the end of the hallway. He swiped a card and pushed it open, jerking his head for them to go inside. "You didn't see me?" he said, his voice flat. "And you don't know my name." Before Alyssa could thank him, he turned and disappeared back down the corridor, leaving them alone. The room they entered was dim, filled with monitors and rows of files. Rita's eyes scanned the screens while Alyssa's breath caught at the sight of the files stacked along the wall. There. His name. She snatched up the file marked Stephen Carver, Steve's full name, her hands trembling as she flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the first page, her throat tightening as she read. Subject, Carver, Stephen. Memory reconstruction procedure initiated following stage 2 trauma. Identity reassignment, successful. Previous connections, suppressed. Subject shows full compliance under influence of psychological conditioning. "No," Alyssa whispered, her chest squeezing painfully. "No, no, no." Her fingers flew over the papers, flipping to the next page. There was a photo of him. Steve, strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to his temples, his eyes glazed over like he wasn't fully present in his own skin. "This is how they took him from me," she choked out, tears blurring her vision. Rita's face hardened. "They wiped him clean," she said grimly. "Made him into someone else." Alyssa felt something inside her snap. Fury roared to life, white-hot and unstoppable. They hadn't just stolen Steve's body. They had stolen his soul, his memories, their love, their life together. They had rewritten him like he was nothing but a blank page. But before she could let the rage swallow her, something on the monitor caught her eye. "Wait," Alyssa said, her voice sharp. "That's him." She pointed to the screen where a live feed showed Steve sitting in a small white room. No windows, just a single chair, a table, and him. He looked hollow, like a shell of the man she once knew, but it was him, his face, his posture. The way he tapped his fingers against his thigh. He always did that when he was nervous. Alyssa's heart ached at the sight. "I have to see him," she said, her voice trembling but full of resolve. Rita didn't argue. She crossed the room and found a map of the facility pinned to the wall. "Here," she pointed. "This hallway leads to the room." They moved quickly, silently, every step tightening the knot in Alyssa's chest. As they approached the door, 2 guards turned the corner, spotting them instantly. "Hey, you're not supposed to be here!" Panic flared, but Rita acted fast. She grabbed Alyssa's hand and yanked her through a side corridor, ducking into a maintenance closet. The guards ran past without stopping, their heavy boots pounding the floor. "We're running out of time," Rita hissed. Alyssa's eyes burned with tears, but she swallowed them down. "I don't care. I'm not leaving without him." Rita nodded once, fierce and loyal as ever. "Then let's finish this." They waited until the coast was clear, then slipped out and made their way to Steve's room. Alyssa's heart pounded against her ribs so hard it hurt. She pressed her palm to the door, took a shaky breath, and pushed it open. There he was. Steve sat at the table, staring blankly at the wall, as if lost in a fog. His face was pale, shadows carved under his eyes, but it was still him. "Steve," Alyssa breathed, stepping into the room. He didn't move, didn't flinch. It was like he didn't even hear her. "Steve," she said again, her voice cracking with emotion. He slowly turned his head toward her, his eyes dull and lifeless. For a terrifying moment, she thought he truly didn't recognize her at all, that the man she loved was gone forever. But then, just for a heartbeat, something flickered in his gaze. A spark. A whisper of memory. "Alyssa?" he said, his voice raw and hoarse, like it had been buried under miles of silence. Her breath caught in her throat. "I'm here," she whispered, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "I found you." For a split second, Alyssa forgot the danger outside the door, forgot the risk, forgot even her own fear. She could only see him. Steve. His lips had formed her name, hesitant and unsure, but it was there. Her name. The sound of it from his mouth felt like a fragile thread between them, like a bridge over a chasm that had nearly swallowed them both. She stepped closer, her breath trembling in her chest. His eyes followed her movement, still cloudy with confusion, but no longer empty, no longer dead. "It's me," she said softly, her voice tight with tears. "It's Alyssa. You remember, don't you? Please tell me you remember." Steve's brow furrowed and he winced, like there was a war happening inside his mind, something clawing its way out of the dark. His fingers twitched on the table, restless, searching. Alyssa wanted to reach for him, but she held herself back, afraid that any sudden move might snap the fragile progress he was making. "I know you," he rasped, his voice rough like it had been unused for too long. His eyes flickered with something deeper now, something real. "But I don't know why." Hope, sharp and desperate, surged in her chest. She moved a little closer, her hands trembling at her sides. "Because you loved me," she whispered. "Because we had a life together. You used to call me sunshine in the mornings. You said I made the world warmer. You used to kiss me and promise me forever." Steve's face tightened like her words were sharp pins pricking at the fog in his mind. He closed his eyes, his breath shallow, his hands curling into fists against the table. Alyssa felt her heart shatter all over again at the sight. Rita's voice came from behind her, low and urgent. "Alyssa, we have to move. They'll be coming soon." "No," Alyssa said fiercely, her gaze locked on Steve. "Not yet." She took another step, then another, until she was close enough to touch him. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand over his clenched fists. His skin was cold, too cold, but under her palm she felt his pulse. Weak, but there. "Come back to me," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please, Steve. I can't lose you again." His eyes snapped open, and this time there was fire in them. Not full memory, not yet, but something primal, something that belonged to the man she knew. His fingers loosened under her touch, and for the first time, he moved, lifting his hand, clumsy and hesitant, to cover hers. "Alyssa," he said again, this time stronger, like the name had weight. She felt tears spill over her cheeks, unstoppable. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, it's me. It's always been me." But then the door behind them slammed open. Alyssa's heart lurched as two guards stormed into the room, guns raised, faces hard with alarm. Rita cursed under her breath, stepping in front of Alyssa protectively. "Step away from the subject," one of the guards barked. Alyssa's hand gripped Steve's tighter, refusing to let go. "He's not a subject. He's a person. He's Steve Carver. He's mine." The guards advanced, and for a moment, Alyssa thought they might drag her away, that this would end with her screaming as they pulled Steve from her reach. But something changed. Steve's other hand shot out, gripping the edge of the table as he forced himself to stand. His legs wobbled under him, but he stood, taller, stronger than he had in the footage. His eyes, still clouded, blazed with something fierce and defiant. "No," he growled, his voice rising from the depths of him. "No more." The guards hesitated, surprised by his sudden strength. Alyssa's heart pounded with a wild mix of fear and hope. "Steve," she said quickly, "they lied to you. They took your life. But I'm here to bring you back. Fight it. Fight them." His eyes flicked to her, and for a heartbeat she saw the man she had loved burning behind them. His jaw clenched, and he turned to the guards, squaring his shoulders like he was preparing for a war. "Get away from her," he said, his voice thick, with rising fury. One of the guards moved to raise his weapon, but before he could aim, Steve acted. Fast and brutal, his body moved on instinct, slamming the table into the guard's legs. The man went down with a shout, his gun clattering across the floor. Rita darted forward, grabbing it in one smooth motion. The second guard lunged, but Steve caught him mid-charge, throwing him against the wall with a strength that shocked even Alyssa. She had forgotten how powerful he could be, how fierce, how alive. "Go!" Rita shouted, tossing the gun aside and pulling open the door. "We have to move now." Alyssa grabbed Steve's hand, their fingers locking tightly together, and they ran. Down the hallway, past the alarms that began to shriek, past the shocked staff and the security rushing in. Steve's steps were uneven, like he was still fighting, to remember how to control his body, but he kept moving, driven by something deeper than memory, driven by her. They burst through the exit just as the first wave of reinforcements arrived, sprinting across the parking lot toward Rita's car. Rita jumped into the driver's seat, Alyssa and Steve scrambling into the back. Tires screeched as they peeled away from the facility, hearts racing, lungs burning. As they sped down the road, Alyssa held Steve's hand in both of hers, tears streaming down her face. "You found me," he said, his voice rough but alive. "I'll always find you," she replied, her voice shaking with relief and something deeper. "Always." The safe house was nothing more than a crumbling cabin hidden at the edge of the woods, but to Alyssa, it felt like salvation. Rita had connections, and she had used every last one to secure this place. Secluded, off the grid, no cameras, no trackers. Just them and the silence of the forest. They had driven for hours, none of them speaking much. Steve had drifted in and, out of restless sleep in the back seat, his head on Alyssa's shoulder, his hand still clutching hers like he was afraid she might vanish if he let go. His face twitched in his sleep, pained, like the war inside his head hadn't stopped when they left the facility. Now in the dim cabin, Alyssa sat beside him on the narrow couch, her thumb brushing over the back of his hand. He was awake, but his eyes were shadowed, clouded by 1,000 memories fighting to surface. Rita kept watch near the window, her eyes sharp and her jaw tight. "We don't have long before they come looking," she warned. "Places like that don't just lose their projects without a fight." Alyssa swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "He's not a project," she said quietly. "He's Steve. He's mine." Steve's gaze flicked to her, as if her words sparked something in the haze of his mind. "Tell me," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Tell me everything." So she did. She told him. About their life together, how they met on a rainy autumn evening when he helped her carry groceries to her car. How he had kissed her the first time under the flicker of streetlights, the taste of rain still on his lips. She told him about late-night drives with no destination, how they used to dance barefoot in the living room to old love songs, and how, He used to trace circles on her back when she couldn't sleep. As she spoke, she watched his expression shift, his eyes glimmering with fragments of recognition. He was reaching for those memories, clawing through the fog, trying to catch them before they slipped away. "You called me sunshine," she whispered, her voice trembling with tears. "You said I lit up your life." His breath hitched, and for a moment, he closed his eyes. "Sunshine," he murmured, tasting the word like it was a thread pulling him back from the abyss. "You loved me," she said, her throat tight. "Don't let them steal that from you." His hand squeezed hers, weak but certain. "I do love you," he said, his voice rough and unsteady, but his eyes were clear. Relief crashed over her, sharp and overwhelming. She pressed her forehead to his, her tears slipping free, warm against his skin. "I love you too," she breathed. "I never stopped." Rita cleared her throat softly, not to interrupt, but to ground them back in reality. "We can't stay here forever," she reminded them, her voice tense. "They will come." Steve's jaw tightened. "Then we run," he said, fire lighting in his eyes, but not without answers. Alyssa frowned, confused. "I remembered something else," Steve continued, struggling to sit up straighter. "They didn't just wipe me. They took me because I knew something dangerous, something they needed to bury." "What did you know?" Rita asked, crossing the room, her full attention locked on him. Steve's eyes darkened. "About the facility, about what they do to people. It's not just memory wipes, it's worse. They're building people, creating false lives for them, to carry out orders without question. Executives, politicians, soldiers, puppets they control from the shadows." A chill ran down Alyssa's spine. "That woman with you, Vanessa, she's part of it?" He nodded grimly. "She's one of the architects. She built my new life. Gave me false memories, false love. Made me believe I belonged to her. But I think I resisted. Somewhere deep inside, I fought it. That's why I kept dreaming about you." Alyssa's heart clenched. "They couldn't erase us," she whispered, her voice tight with both sorrow and defiance. Steve looked at her with a fire that hadn't been there before. "No," he agreed, stronger now. "They couldn't." Rita's gaze flicked between them. "Then, we expose them," she said firmly. "We make sure the world knows." "It's not going to be easy," Steve warned. "They'll hunt us. They'll try to silence us." Alyssa's eyes hardened with resolve. "Let them try." For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt whole, not healed, not yet. The wounds were still raw, but she was no longer alone in the fight. Steve was back, not just breathing, not just surviving. Back, and together, they weren't going to hide. They were going to burn it all down. As Rita secured the cabin and packed what little gear they had, Alyssa sat beside Steve, her hand still woven tightly with his. They didn't speak much, because words weren't needed. The promise was clear between them, as strong as the love that had pulled him back from the edge. They would run, they would fight, but most of all, they would reclaim their stolen life. Together. No more ghosts. No more lies. Only the truth. Raw and unbreakable. And as the sun broke over the horizon, casting light through the dusty cabin window, Alyssa saw the future in Steve's eyes. No matter what came next, they would face it side by side, until the very end.